There is a moment that every long-haul trucker knows. You have been driving for 6 hours, the GPS says the bridge is 2 miles ahead, and then you see it. A rusted deck, narrow lanes, a guardrail that looks like it was installed during the Eisenhower administration and has not been touched since. You check your weight, you check your clearance, you do the math in your head the way you always do, and somewhere in the back of your mind, a very quiet voice says, "I am not sure this thing is going to hold." That voice is not paranoia. That voice is engineering intuition. And it has been right more times than the federal government would like to admit. Why bridges kill trucks and why nobody talks about it. Here is something they do not teach you in driver's ed, mostly because driver's ed assumes you are operating a 2,000-pound sedan and not an 80,000-pound freight train on wheels. Bridges are not built to last forever. They are built to last a design life, usually 50 years, sometimes 75, occasionally 100 if the engineers were feeling optimistic and the contractor was not cutting corners. After that design, life expires, one of three things happens. The bridge gets replaced, the bridge gets repaired, or the bridge gets inspected every 2 years, rated structurally deficient, added to a list somewhere in a government database, and left exactly where it is while trucks keep crossing it. As of the most recent federal data, there are roughly 42,000 structurally deficient bridges in the United States. 42,000, that is not a typo. Some of them carry passenger cars, some of them carry school buses, and some of them carry 80,000-pound semi-trucks loaded with everything from frozen beef to construction steel to hazardous chemicals, 6 days a week, 365 days a year. The clearance problem is separate but equally terrifying. Standard interstate clearance is 14 feet. A standard semi with a loaded trailer runs about 13 feet 6 inches. That 6-inch margin sounds fine until you are on a back road in rural Kentucky and the sign says 12 feet and your GPS did not know and now you are committed and there is nowhere to turn around. Truckers call bridges that have claimed victims can openers. The name explains itself. What follows is not a list of bridges that look scary in photographs. This is a list of bridges where the fear is earned, where the engineering record, the accident history, the inspection reports, or the sheer physics of the structure justify every single sleepless mile of anxiety that truckers carry across them. The Southern Gauntlet, Bridges 20 through 16. Bridge 20, the Huey P. Long Bridge, Jefferson Parish, Louisiana. Named after a governor and senator whose personality was about as subtle as the bridge itself, the Huey P. Long opened in 1935 and spent the better part of 80 years as one of the most legitimately dangerous crossings in the American South. The original structure carried 2 lanes of traffic and 2 railroad tracks on a deck so narrow that the outside lanes were essentially suggestions. Side mirrors on wide loads came within inches of the railing. The vertical clearance below was fine. The lateral clearance above was the problem. The bridge sat 63 feet over the Mississippi River, which is not the issue. The issue was that getting onto it required navigating an approach ramp that felt to anyone in a large vehicle like trying to thread a needle while moving at highway speed. A 14-foot wide lane sounds reasonable until the lane is also curving and the drop is 60 feet and the railing is painted a color that faded out sometime around 1978. A widening project completed in 2013 added additional lanes and brought the deck up to something approaching modern standards. Truckers who crossed it before the renovation will tell you they did not fully exhale until they reached the other side. One driver I came across in an online forum described it simply as the bridge where I made peace with whatever comes next. Bridge 19, the Pecos High Bridge, Texas. This one is not about width, this one is about height. The Pecos High Bridge carries US Highway 90 over the Pecos River Canyon in southwestern Texas, and the drop from the deck to the canyon floor is approximately 273 feet. To put that in perspective, that is taller than the Statue of Liberty from base to torch. You are driving a truck that weighs as much as a small house across a structure that hangs over a drop that would take a falling object more than 4 seconds to complete. The bridge itself is structurally sound. It is inspected. It meets standards. None of that information is particularly comforting when you are 6 inches from the edge, and the wind off the canyon is pushing your trailer sideways, and the guardrail looks like it was designed for a vehicle approximately 1/10 your size. Bridge 18, Lake Pontchartrain Causeway, Louisiana, 24 miles. That is the length of the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway, which held the record as the world's longest bridge over water for nearly 40 years. 24 miles of two-lane causeway over open water with no exits, no shoulders wide enough to matter, and in certain weather conditions, no visible land in any direction. For truckers, the causeway presents a specific problem that has nothing to do with the structure. When high winds close the causeway to high-profile vehicles, which happens with some regularity during Gulf weather systems, the detour adds roughly an hour and a half to the route, so you have a choice. Wait for the wind advisory to lift, or find another way. Neither option is free, and time in trucking is not abstract. Time is money with a delivery window attached. Bridge 17, the Natchez Trace Parkway Bridge, Mississippi. This one is almost cheating to include because it is genuinely beautiful. Twin concrete arches, no visible supports from below, a design that won engineering awards when it opened in 2001. But here is the thing about beautiful bridges. They are often beautiful because the engineers got creative, and creative engineering sometimes produces structures that behave in ways that standard training does not prepare you for. The Natchez Trace Bridge has a posted weight limit, and that limit is enforced, which means certain loads simply cannot cross. For a trucker who has already driven 200 miles expecting to cross here, that sign is not aesthetic. That sign is a catastrophe. Bridge 16, the Cochran-Africatown Bridge, Alabama. The Cochran-Africatown Bridge in Mobile has a clearance issue that has been claimed by enough trucks over the years to earn it a local reputation. The bridge connects two parts of the city across the Mobile River, and the approach geometry combined with the vertical clearance of certain underpasses in the connecting road network creates a situation where a driver who is relying on GPS rather than local knowledge can find themselves committed to a route that their vehicle literally cannot complete. This happens more often than the city of Mobile would probably like discussed publicly. The Rust Belt Relics, Bridges 15 through 11. Bridge 15, the Brent Spence Bridge, Covington, Kentucky and Cincinnati, Ohio. The Brent Spence Bridge carries Interstates 71 and 75 across the Ohio River, and it carries them at a volume that it was never designed to handle. The bridge opened in 1963 with a design capacity of 85,000 vehicles per day. It currently carries somewhere between 160,000 and 180,000 every day. It was declared functionally obsolete in 1994, not structurally deficient, functionally obsolete, which is the engineering equivalent of saying this thing works, technically, but it was not designed for what you are asking it to do. The lanes are narrow, the merges are aggressive. There is no shoulder. A breakdown on the Brent Spence does not just create a traffic problem. It creates a regional supply chain problem because roughly 3% of the entire nation's gross domestic product moves across this bridge annually. Congress has been discussing a replacement since roughly 2003. Construction finally began in earnest around 2023. In the meantime, truckers have been white-knuckling across a functionally obsolete bridge carrying twice its intended load for 30 years and counting. Bridge 14, the Pulaski Skyway, Newark, New Jersey. Opened in 1932, the Pulaski Skyway is a cantilever through truss bridge that runs 3.5 miles over the Hackensack and Passaic rivers in northern New Jersey. It is also one of the oldest major bridges in the country, still carrying significant traffic. The lanes are 9 feet wide, not 12, not 11, 9. A standard semi-truck is 8.5 feet wide, which leaves you approximately 6 inches on each side, in theory. In practice, on a bridge built in the early 1930s with tolerances that reflected the vehicle sizes of that era, those 6 inches are not guaranteed. Rehabilitation work has been done. More is planned. But every trucker who has crossed the Pulaski Skyway at night, in rain, with a full load, will tell you that 9-foot lanes on a 90-year-old elevated structure above a river is not a situation where you think about your podcast. You think about the lane. Bridge 13, the Kinzua Bridge, McKean County, Pennsylvania. The Kinzua Bridge is technically no longer a bridge. In 2003, a tornado destroyed 5 of the 11 original towers. What remains is a partial structure preserved as a state park exhibit with a glass-floored observation deck extending over the canyon where the missing towers used to stand. But before the tornado, the Kinzua Viaduct was one of the most audacious railroad bridges ever built, rising 301 feet above Kinzua Creek in northwestern Pennsylvania. It was the highest railroad bridge in the world when it opened in 1882. It held that record for 2 years. The tornado that destroyed it in 2003 moved one of the towers 450 feet from its original location. The wind did in 30 seconds what the structure had resisted for over a century. It belongs on this list not because trucks cross it, but because it represents the thing that every trucker carrying a load across an old bridge already knows. Structures endure until they don't. The interval between those two states is not always predictable. Bridge 12, the Ambassador Bridge, Detroit, Michigan, and Windsor, Ontario. The Ambassador Bridge connects the United States and Canada at Detroit and Windsor, and it is the busiest international crossing in North America by trade volume. 25% of all trade between the US and Canada crosses this bridge every day. On a structure that opened in 1929, it is not a small bridge. The main span is 1,850 feet, and the clearance over the Detroit River is 152 feet. It is also a privately owned bridge, which in America means maintenance decisions are made by people whose primary incentive is profit rather than engineering conservatism. A second span, the Gordie Howe International Bridge, is under construction and will eventually relieve pressure on the Ambassador. Until then, an enormous percentage of international freight crosses daily on a 95-year-old privately owned bridge, and if that sentence does not contain at least two things that concern you, please read it again. Bridge 11, the Ironton-Russell Bridge, Ohio and Kentucky. The Ironton-Russell Bridge was a swing-span bridge crossing the Ohio River between Ironton, Ohio and Russell, Kentucky, and it was terrifying in the specific, intimate way that small bridges are terrifying. Not because of height or length, but because of age and condition. It opened in 1920 and was closed in 2016 after inspectors determined it could no longer be safely operated. For context, it was already old enough to collect Social Security when they finally shut it down. In its final years, the bridge had a weight limit of 3 tons. 3 tons. A loaded pickup truck weighs more than 3 tons. Truckers who knew the river avoided it. Truckers who did not know the river found out the hard way what 3 tons means when you are driving something that weighs 40 times that. The Oakley C. Collins Memorial Bridge replaced it in 2016. The Ironton-Russell now sits in the river, partially demolished, waiting for full removal. It is the kind of ending that should come faster than it does. The Western Edge, Bridges 10 through 6. Bridge 10, the Astoria-Megler Bridge, Oregon and Washington. The Astoria-Megler Bridge crosses the mouth of the Columbia River between Astoria, Oregon and Point Ellis, Washington, and it is 4.1 miles long, which makes it the longest continuous through-truss bridge in North America. It is also, in certain weather conditions, one of the most violent driving experiences available to a trucker in the Pacific Northwest. The Columbia River mouth is where the river meets the Pacific Ocean, and the wind at that intersection is not a gentle coastal breeze. It is the kind of lateral force that pushes a loaded trailer sideways in a way that requires active countersteering to hold the lane. The bridge has no shoulders worth mentioning. The lanes are standard width, which on a structure exposed to marine wind conditions means standard width feels immediately inadequate. The view is spectacular, by the way. Truly. Irrelevant to the terror, but worth noting. Bridge 9, the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge, California. The Richmond-San Rafael Bridge crosses San Francisco Bay between Richmond and San Rafael, and it carries Interstate 580. What it does not carry is a shoulder on the lower deck. The bridge has 2 decks. The upper deck carries westbound traffic. The lower deck carries eastbound traffic in a confined space with limited visibility and exactly nowhere to go if something goes wrong. A breakdown on the lower deck of the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge requires a response from the California Highway Patrol because there is no place to pull over. You are in a tube. There are no options. The bridge also sits in a seismically active region, carries heavy freight traffic, and was built in 1956, which means it predates every major revision to earthquake engineering standards that California has implemented since. Bridge 8, the Biggs Maryhill Bridge, Oregon. Small bridge, narrow lanes, high winds off the Columbia River Gorge. A structure that looks, when you approach it from the Oregon side, less like a major freight crossing and more like something a particularly confident civil engineer drew on a napkin in 1962. Truckers who run the Pacific Coast routes know this bridge. They know it by reputation before they cross it by experience. The reputation is accurate. Bridge 7, the Royal Gorge Bridge, Colorado. The Royal Gorge Bridge is a suspension bridge that hangs over the Arkansas River Canyon near Canyon City, Colorado, and the drop from deck to river is 955 feet. It held the record as the world's highest bridge for 75 years after opening in 1929. It is now a tourist attraction. It is not rated for commercial freight, but it exists on this list because it represents a category of bridge that truckers encounter more often than people realize. The bridge rated for passenger vehicles only, sometimes marked clearly, sometimes marked inadequately, sometimes not marked at all, until you are already on the approach and the structure ahead of you is making a sound that suspension bridges should not make in wind. Bridge 6, the $1 Million Bridge, Alaska. The $1 Million Bridge crosses the Copper River near Cordova, Alaska, and it has survived a magnitude 8.6 earthquake in 1964, which partially collapsed one of its spans. The collapsed span was eventually repaired, though repaired in this context means propped back up rather than rebuilt to modern standards. The bridge carries the Copper River Highway, which is unpaved and which connects essentially to nothing on the other end. It is remote in a way that American remoteness rarely achieves. The nearest significant settlement is Cordova, which you can only reach by plane or ferry. There is no road connecting Cordova to the rest of Alaska's highway system. Trucks that cross the $1 Million Bridge are accessing the Childs Glacier Recreation Area and seasonally commercial fishing infrastructure. They cross a partially collapsed, earthquake-damaged, propped-up span over a glacially fed river in one of the most isolated corners of North America, and they do it because it is the only way across. The 5 that truckers lose sleep over, bridges 5 through 1. Bridge 5, the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, Maryland. The William Preston Lane Jr. Memorial Bridge, which everyone calls the Bay Bridge, crosses the Chesapeake Bay on Maryland Route 50 between Sandy Point and Kent Island. The main span of the older of the 2 parallel bridges rises to 186 feet above the water, and the total crossing is 4.3 miles. On a clear day in a passenger car, it is fine. On a clear day in a loaded semi and a crosswind off the Chesapeake, it is a different conversation entirely. The wind off the bay is unpredictable and lateral, meaning it hits the broadside of a trailer like a sail, and the trailer responds like a sail, which is to say it tries to go where the wind is going rather than where the driver intends. The Bay Bridge offers a driver assistance service where a Maryland Transportation Authority driver will literally drive your vehicle across for you if you experience driving anxiety. Thousands of people use this service every year. It exists for passenger cars. Truckers do not get that option. Truckers get the bridge. Bridge 4, the Mackinac Bridge, Mackinac City, and St. Ignace, Michigan. The Mackinac Bridge connects Michigan's lower and upper peninsulas across the Straits of Mackinac, where Lake Michigan and Lake Huron meet. The main span is 3,800 feet, and the total length is nearly 5 miles. It opened in 1957 and remains one of the longest suspension bridges in the Western Hemisphere. During high winds, the Mackinac Bridge Authority restricts traffic. High-profile vehicles, meaning trucks, vans, sport utility vehicles, anything with significant surface area, are either escorted or prohibited depending on conditions. The restriction is not theoretical caution. It is policy developed from experience, because the Straits of Mackinac produce wind conditions that are not intuitive to drivers who have never experienced them. In 1989, a woman driving a Yugo, and yes, that is a real sentence, was blown off the bridge during high winds. The car went through the railing. She did not survive. The Yugo is a very small vehicle. If the wind took a Yugo, please consider what it does to a loaded trailer. Bridge 3, the Brotherton Bridge, Montana. The Brotherton Bridge crosses the Musselshell River in central Montana, and it is not famous. It is not the subject of engineering awards or tourist services or documentary films. It is a rural bridge in an enormous state, carrying agricultural loads across a river that floods seasonally, on a structure that has been weight restricted, repaired, weight restricted again, and used regardless of all of it, because in central Montana, the alternative to the Brotherton Bridge is a very long drive in a direction that does not help you. It represents every rural bridge in America that nobody talks about because the people who cross it do not have a platform to talk about it. They just cross it and they hope, and mostly it holds, and occasionally it does not, and the county files a report and the federal government adds it to the list, and the list gets longer. Bridge 2, the Old Vicksburg Bridge, Mississippi. The Old Vicksburg Bridge is a railroad and highway bridge crossing the Mississippi River at Vicksburg, and it has been in various states of active use, limited use, and contested use for most of its existence. The structure dates to 1930, and its continued operation as any kind of freight crossing has been the subject of engineering debate for decades. The Mississippi River at Vicksburg is not a gentle crossing. The current is substantial, the river is wide, and the bridge sits in a corridor that sees significant commercial freight because the geography of the Mississippi Valley makes certain crossings unavoidable. When your options are limited by a river that is nearly a mile wide, you cross where the crossing exists, even if the crossing is 90 years old, and the inspection report uses words that you would prefer not to dwell on. Bridge 1. The Steubenville-Weirton Bridge, West Virginia and Ohio. The Steubenville-Weirton Bridge, more formally the Fort Steuben Bridge, crosses the Ohio River between Steubenville, Ohio and Weirton, West Virginia, and it is the bridge that earns the #1 position, not through a single dramatic characteristic, but through the accumulation of every factor that makes a bridge frightening. Age. It opened in 1905 as a railroad bridge and was converted for highway use. Condition. It has cycled through structural deficiency ratings for years. Context. It serves a region of the Ohio Valley where manufacturing and freight traffic have not declined as much as the infrastructure serving them. Alternatives. There are none that do not add significant mileage to routes that are already long. And width. The width of the Fort Steuben Bridge on its converted highway deck is the kind of dimension that, when you see it printed in an official document, makes you want to sit quietly for a moment and think about your choices. Truckers who run the upper Ohio Valley know this bridge the way sailors know a particular reef, not as something to be afraid of exactly, as something to be respected, as something that will not forgive a mistake. What the engineers know that you don't. Here is the number that matters. The American Society of Civil Engineers gives America's infrastructure a C-. If your kid came home with a C- in bridge engineering, you would have questions. Serious ones. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act directed significant money toward bridges, the largest dedicated bridge investment since the interstate system was created. That sounds like progress. It is also, by engineering community estimates, enough to address roughly a third of the identified backlog. 2/3 remains identified and backlogged. Structurally deficient does not mean imminent collapse. That is what transportation officials will tell you. And it is technically accurate. It means engineers know something is wrong and have written it down. What it does not mean is that someone fixed it. Bridges are inspected every 24 months. 2 years is a long time. Every bridge flexes. The question is whether it is flexing the way it was designed to. Nobody always knows the answer to that until they do. The one that actually collapsed. On the 1st of August, 2007, at 6:05 in the evening, the Interstate 35W bridge over the Mississippi River in Minneapolis, Minnesota, collapsed during the evening rush hour. 13 people died, 145 were injured. A bridge on an interstate highway carrying over 100,000 vehicles per day fell into the river on a summer evening while rush hour traffic sat on it. The National Transportation Safety Board determined the probable cause to be the failure of undersized gusset plates, the steel connection pieces that join the structural members of the truss. The original gusset plates, installed when the bridge opened in 1967, were calculated at ½ an inch thick when the design required 1 inch. That error was introduced at the design stage and was never caught. For 40 years, a bridge carrying an interstate highway over the Mississippi River was standing on gusset plates that were half the thickness they needed to be. The immediate trigger was the weight of construction materials and equipment that had been placed on the bridge during an ongoing resurfacing project. The additional load, concentrated on an already compromised section of the span, finally exceeded what the underdesigned gusset plates could carry. The bridge had been inspected. It had been rated structurally deficient since 1990. It had been inspected 17 times in the 17 years between that rating and the collapse. Inspectors had noted cracking, corrosion, and concerns. The NTSB found that none of the inspections had identified the fatally undersized gusset plates because nobody was looking for a design error. They were looking for deterioration of a design they assumed was correct. This is the thing that stays with you. The inspectors were competent. The process was followed. The bridge was being maintained. And it still fell. In 2008, the replacement bridge, designated I-35W St. Anthony Falls Bridge, opened after just over a year of construction. It is a modern structure with extensive monitoring systems, sensors embedded in the concrete that transmit data continuously. It is, by every available measure, an exceptionally safe bridge. The original bridge carried over 100,000 vehicles a day for 40 years on gusset plates that were never right. 40 years. 17 inspections. And then one August evening, it simply was not there anymore. The debris from the collapse was removed over the following months. Before demolition was complete, the construction workers who had been on the bridge during the collapse, several of whom survived by extraordinary luck and circumstance, were brought back to retrieve their equipment from what remained of the deck. One of them reportedly drove a piece of construction equipment off the collapsed span and across the temporary access road and did not look back. There is a sign that truckers learn to read long before it becomes official policy. Not a posted sign, not anything in a federal manual. It is written in the behavior of other drivers, in the quality of the deck under your wheels, in the sound a structure makes when you put 80,000 pounds on it. Every bridge tells you something if you know how to listen. There are 617,000 bridges in the United States. 42,000 are structurally deficient. Several hundred thousand are over 50 years old. And the freight does not stop moving because the paperwork is uncomfortable. The engineers know, the inspectors know, the truckers absolutely know. And every day, somebody pulls out of a truck stop, drives toward a bridge the federal government has already acknowledged is not what it used to be, and crosses it anyway. Because the load has to get there. Because the bridge is what's there, and the crossing happens regardless.